In a conversation with Henry Kissinger in the 1970s, China's leader Mao Zedong said he could live without Taiwan for now. But in 100 years, we will want it, he said. And what's more, we are going to fight for it. Mao's 100-year deadline may arrive ahead of schedule. In a Chinese documentary called Chasing Dreams, the country's bravest warriors declare their willingness to die in an all-out invasion of Taiwan. If it's too hard to remove the mines in Taiwanese waters, one says, we would use our bodies to clear a pathway. My fighter jet would become a missile, rushing towards the enemy, if I used up my ammunition, says a pilot. I want to see the other side of the strait, a soldier declares. I've been preparing for that day. A war over Taiwan would be an act of madness. Tens of thousands could die.
Nearly 1.2 million jobs have disappeared.
There could be a global Great Depression. Nuclear weapons would be on the table. An attack would be a massive gamble for China's Communist Party. It could risk losing the party's grip on power. But China appears to be preparing for its D-Day. Its leader Xi Jinping has said he seeks a peaceful reunion. But he wants his military ready to invade, if necessary, within 3 years, according to U.S. intelligence. Why would China risk everything and throw the world into turmoil over an island less than 1% of its size? To understand why, we need to understand Taiwan. Once a land of poverty that became a powerful economy.
Taiwan was officially ceded to Japan.
A former colony turned vibrant democracy. But for China,
A full-scale civil war.
Taiwan is an open wound. Part of a history of humiliation, which remains unfinished business. Good evening, I'm Fareed Zakaria. Welcome to a special hour on Taiwan. The National Palace Museum holds much of China's most precious works of art. Treasures from the Song Dynasty, vases from the Ming Dynasty, 8,000 years of priceless history. It's China's Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's Louvre. But it is not in Beijing. It is in Taipei, the capital of Taiwan.
A race for territory began.
In 1949,
There is to be no compromise.
at the end of a brutal civil war, China's leader Chiang Kai-shek shipped those treasures to Taiwan
The communists are in the Yangtze Valley.
to keep them from his rival, Mao Zedong.
They carried those treasures with them because as the guardians of the Chinese civilization, they felt that they had to also be the guardians of those objects.
Year after year, this civil war goes on.
Chiang and his Nationalist Party had been fighting Mao and the Communist Party since the 1920s, in one of the bloodiest civil wars the world had seen.
They have passed the point of no return. No mercy, say the communists. Each side blames the other.
Over 2 million soldiers were killed or wounded, with roughly 5 million civilians dead. And Chiang Kai-shek was about to lose.
This was a war between two parties fighting for the soul of China. Ultimately, the communists won.
A red China that is the powerful and ruthless communist co-equal of Soviet Russia.
Chairman Mao declared the dawn of the People's Republic of China.
The nationalist government flee to the independent island of Formosa.
Chiang and his 500,000 troops escaped to Taiwan, but claimed their defeat was only a temporary setback.
Liberate the homeland. It's a call to arms.
Chiang harbored this fantasy of recovering the mainland.
Chiang Kai-shek set up an entire government in exile, with leaders for all of mainland China's provinces.
This was a pipe dream. Recovering the mainland was a pipe dream.
The regime mobilized the whole island to fulfill that pipe dream of retaking the mainland, even though most of Taiwan's population was not even from there.
Taipei, the Taiwanese capital, is the government seat of nationalist China.
Taiwan had its own history and people. A mix of ethnic Chinese, Aborigines, and other groups.
Taiwan's early history is a series of wars, rebellions, and invasions.
It had been occupied by Japan since the late 1800s. At the end of World War II, the nationalists took over,
imposing their own personal dictatorship.
And they brought their autocratic ways from the mainland.
There's no opposition party. Freedom is limited. Amnesty International accuses the government of torturing political prisoners.
Tens of thousands were murdered by the regime. Chiang Kai-shek's rule became known as the White Terror.
The rationale was that essentially Taiwan was under siege from the forces of communism.
In fact, Chairman Mao was attacking Taiwanese islands near the mainland throughout the 1950s. For both sides, the Civil War had never really ended.
They each are trying to indicate to the other, this isn't over.
Red China is warned by the president that he will not hesitate to commit American armed forces.
Mao's attacks got America's attention.
The addition of Nike Hercules missile batteries on Formosa.
And nearly led to the unthinkable.
The U.S. responded by threatening to strike China's coastal cities with nuclear weapons.
One of the war's most historic meetings.
America's relationship with Taiwan had been complicated.
Long live the revolutionary spirit of the nationalist China.
It had bankrolled Chiang Kai-shek in the Civil War, then turned its back on him after he lost, and planned to abandon him if Mao invaded. But in June of 1950,
we are fighting in Korea for our own national security and survival.
Communist North Korea invaded South Korea, and neighboring Taiwan became a crucial Cold War player.
The tune in Washington changed 180 degrees.
As the most powerful nation in the world, we have to assume world responsibilities.
President Harry Truman sent the Navy into the Taiwan Strait.
Mr. Eisenhower praised Formosa for keeping alive the cause of liberty.
And America backed Taiwan as the only legitimate government of China.
Chiang Kai-shek owes Kim Il-sung a major debt of gratitude for saving his regime, because Mao was about to send 1 million troops across the Taiwan Strait to finish his regime.
Chiang and Madame Chiang were pictured as the aging Kennedys of a Camelot.
The U.S. now painted Chiang Kai-shek
Welcome to free China,
as a defender of freedom.
the dream of liberty.
But by the 1970s, times were changing. America was losing a war in Vietnam. And President Richard Nixon needed a new Cold War strategy.
The greatest threat to the United States was not China, it was the Soviet Union.
China could be an important supplement to the American deterrent against Soviet adventurism in Europe, as well as Asia and worldwide.
Nixon sent Henry Kissinger on a secret visit to Beijing.
East meets West as a handshake bridges 22 years of hostility.
The following year, he met with Mao.
We do not want walls of ideology or philosophy between peoples,
opening the door for a whole new relationship with mainland China.
Our two peoples tonight hold the future of the world in our hands.
Meanwhile, at the United Nations, Mao's China was invited in, while Chiang Kai-shek's Taiwan
This vote has confirmed the
was forced out.
This is a final leaving.
Okay. No question. I want any question.
And a few years later, America recognized Beijing as the real China,
This will serve the interest of both our nations.
cutting off diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
To the health of the Republic of China.
People in Taiwan are freaking out.
This would leave Taiwan in a globally highly isolated position.
Taiwan had reached a dangerous low point. What's more, Chiang Kai-shek, its longtime leader, had died. Chiang's son, Chiang Ching-kuo, took over and pursued a bold new strategy: to move Taiwan toward democracy in order to save it.
He knew that the future of Taiwan would depend on support of the US. But how do you build up American support? You have to be really democratic.
Chiang filled key government posts with native Taiwanese. Massive pro-democracy protests pushed Chiang further and helped spawn the Democratic Progressive Party, Taiwan's first big political opposition.
Martial law was declared officially at an end.
In 1987, Chiang lifted the island's decades-long state of martial law.
John oversaw a major political liberalization inside Taiwan.
The following year, Taiwan's Gorbachev passed away, and his vice president, Lee Teng-hui, a native of Taiwan, took the helm.
He regarded himself as someone standing up for the island's interests, and this was a real earthquake in terms of the domestic politics of the island of Taiwan.
Democracy under President Lee arrived fast and furiously. Old, unelected legislators from the mainland were forced out. And the first full elections for parliament brought new blood in.
We used to joke about how you have to go to Taiwan every year because something is happening for the first time in every election.
Candidates are out in force. Voters in Taiwan go to the polls
as they directly elect their president for the first time.
Taiwan's first free presidential election was held in 1996.
This election represents an historic turning point.
It's the culmination of 9 years of reforms.
And Lee Teng-hui, known as Mr. Democracy, won decisively. For the first time in China's 4,000-year history,
this is a major step.
Transforming an authoritarian state
to the world's first genuinely democratic Chinese society.
A Chinese people had freely chosen its leader.
The impact of what happened
will be shaping Asia for the next 50 years.
Back in Beijing,
the leadership here cannot allow any attempts to divide China.
There was shock and rage.
New warnings by China's military.
Chinese military exercises.
Weeks earlier, China had launched missiles that landed close to Taiwan.
Beijing insists democracy is not a suitable form of government.
And rehearsed for an amphibious assault.
Missile firings into the sea just to show their ire and their anger.
Not only had the so-called renegade province gone democratic,
Beijing acknowledges deep opposition to independence.
There was talk of independence during the campaign.
Li struck a defiant note, declaring that he would never give in to Chinese pressure.
A nightmare scenario for the party of Mao.
Taiwan's troops remain on high alert.
If Taiwan were to consider proclaiming independence, it would be literally explosive. That is the one thing the mainland has said would provoke an attack.
Coming up,
the Taiwan mainland thaw represents a stunning change.
How a reunion between two bitter enemies seemed possible once upon a time. Before a bitter civil war,
Mao's forces swept over all of mainland China.
And decades of conflict,
it's a hazardous task for ships trying to beat the communist blockade of Quemoy.
The man who would eventually lead China, Deng Xiaoping, and the future president of Taiwan, Chiang Ching-kuo, were classmates and close friends in college. They studied together in the 1920s and lived in the same university dormitory. Two men cut from the same cloth, like many of their fellow communist and rival nationalists.
There is to be no compromise.
What's more, these warring factions shared the same dream: to reunify their homeland.
Free China. What a difference a word makes.
And that homeland was China. Like bitter sibling rivals, the two sides hated each other.
Highest-level talks between Communist China and its longtime nationalist adversary in 43 years.
But there was always the hope that they would remain family. This is the story of a family rift that seemed to be mending, but became permanent, much to the shock of Beijing. For decades, China's founding revolutionary Mao Zedong had been threatening to liberate Taiwan by force. But all of that changed with Mao's successor, Deng Xiaoping. Deng pursued a kinder, gentler approach to the world, including Taiwan. He made it an offer he thought it couldn't refuse. If the island returned to the motherland, it would be allowed to essentially run itself, keeping its own political system, its economy, and even its military.
His offer slogan was "One country, two systems."
Deng's old classmate, Chiang Ching-kuo, turned him down. But quietly, Chiang abandoned his father, Chiang Kai-shek's old pipe dream of taking back the mainland.
The Prime Minister's visit to China in September 1982 provided the opportunity to open discussion.
Deng then offered one country, two systems to the British colony of Hong Kong in the 1980s, hoping it would eventually become an alluring example for Taiwan.
Hong Kong was supposed to be the test case to prove that the PRC could be trusted to actually tolerate another system.
Then suddenly, a bizarre breakthrough when a Taiwanese pilot hijacked a plane and defected to China. The two sides were forced to end their silence for the first time since the Chinese Civil War, leading to a surprising rapprochement.
Thousands of Taiwan residents are returning to their families and hometowns here.
Families that had been separated for decades were now allowed to visit each other. Trade, once a trickle, rose into the billions. A National Unification Council in Taiwan explored a roadmap for a reunion. And a historic summit in Singapore was held to much fanfare.
There were a lot of people who were kind of trying to come up with something. Should it be a commonwealth or a confederation? Or what about something like the EU?
But Taiwan was undergoing a massive sea change. Democracy was flourishing.
President Lee swept a victory with almost 54% of the vote.
And the Taiwanese people were asserting their own unique identity.
The question really became, why are we still worrying about China? We've been separated since 1949. Why can't we just get a divorce?
Beijing was shocked and appalled by this metamorphosis.
I don't think the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership have ever understood the reality on the ground in Taiwan.
What's more, the pro-unification nationalists lost power in 2000.
The people of Taiwan have spoken!
To the more anti-mainland Democratic Progressive Party.
A major democratic turning point in Taiwan.
And though the nationalists regained power in 2008 and signed a flurry of trade deals with China, they were met with massive protests, known as the Sunflower Movement.
Students occupy parliament.
Polls have just closed in Taiwan.
Soon, Taiwan's more anti-Beijing party, the DPP, was back in power.
A really very clear victory for TAIWAN.
Meanwhile in Beijing, a new leader in the mold of Mao was far less tolerant of bold assertions from its sibling rival, Xi Jinping. His signature initiative was China's Great Rejuvenation, restoring its historic status as a great power.
Until Taiwan is brought back into the fold, that rejuvenation will not be seen as complete.
In Hong Kong, Xi effectively eradicated one country, two systems, bringing a freedom-loving city to its knees.
Taiwanese were riveted by what was happening in Hong Kong.
The message to Taiwan was clear. You could be next. Taiwanese call it their sacred mountain. protector of the nation. It's not a religious shrine or a top-secret weapon. It's a world-renowned company that makes the most important technology in the world today, the microchip. Our lives run on semiconductors.
From our phones to our cars, in our military use, semiconductor is omnipresent today.
And nobody makes them better than Taiwan. Over 60% of the world's chips come from this small island, and 90% of the most advanced chips are made by just one company, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Microchips are the oil of the 21st century. And if Taiwan is attacked, the whole world could grind to a halt, plunging into a global Great Depression. How did Taiwan, this David in the Pacific, become the Goliath of semiconductors? This is the story of how one man rewrote Taiwan's destiny, and how microchips might save its future. (1949). Mao's communists are sweeping across China, driving Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists from the mainland.
Left behind is a nation in chaos.
A young student, Morris Chang, also flees, leaving Hong Kong for Harvard, then MIT. Eventually, he moves to cowboy country.
Mighty Texas, largest of all the United States.
And joins another premier institution, Texas Instruments.
At that time, TI Semiconductor is #1 in the world.
It was the company to work for if you were in the semiconductor industry.
Here, Chang becomes an American.
The objective, semiconductors.
And a master of making chips.
It was a very exciting time for the semiconductor technology.
Today and tomorrow, a new tool.
In chip making, it is more of an art than a science.
The basic goal, make it smaller, more reliable, more economical.
And that's what Morris Chang was particularly skilled at, finding new ways to improve product quality and drive down the price.
While Chang was climbing the corporate ladder, China shook the world, detonating its first nuclear bomb in 1964. Meanwhile, a bloody war in Vietnam had America considering a retreat in Asia.
When Richard Nixon was elected, he gave a very prominent speech talking about having Asian allies and partners stand up for their own defense rather than relying on the United States. If you were sitting in Taiwan, that made you very, very nervous.
Taiwan desperately needed a way to keep its powerful ally on board. The solution? Link Taiwan's economy much more closely to America's, to give the U.S. more skin in the game.
The more U.S. factories they had on the island, the more U.S. companies would have a real stake in making sure that China didn't attack.
By 1969, Texas Instruments was in Taiwan. The island was industrializing quickly.
Its so-called economic miracle.
Fast becoming the famed Taiwan miracle. Meanwhile, Morris Chang's career had stalled at Texas Instruments. Soon, Taiwan came calling. Its government asked him to lead not just one company, but to lead Taiwan's entire chip industry. It was an offer he couldn't refuse.
He saw a unique opportunity to build something almost from scratch.
Now in Taiwan, Chang pioneered a radical new business model. At the time, most chip companies designed and made their own chips.
but manufacturing them was painstakingly difficult and expensive. So Chiang decided that Taiwan would become the world's master chip maker, building the chips that other companies designed.
The intuition was sort of like Gutenberg. Gutenberg didn't write any books, he only printed them. Morris Chang didn't want to design any new chips, he only wanted to manufacture them.
Chiang's approach was a massive gamble.
At the time, it was a crazy idea because there were no companies that existed that only designed chips.
But Chiang was determined. In 1987, he founded the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC.
It would give birth to a series of other startups that wouldn't have to invest in factories, wouldn't have to invest in equipment, could only do the design and rely on him to manufacture.
And that was essentially how Taiwan changed the game.
The orders started rolling in.
I'm predicting a fairly healthy growth this year.
And the company became an industry leader.
TSMC leapfrogged in its technology breakthrough, and Intel and Samsung had no way to catch up.
Today, TSMC is the only company making the most powerful semiconductor in the latest iPhones, a chip packed with 19 billion microscopic transistors, each less than half the size of a coronavirus. That mastery has made TSMC one of the most valuable companies in the world.
TSMC is the crown jewel. It has semiconductors that everybody wants.
But one of the company's biggest customers is also Taiwan's biggest threat. China is highly dependent on TSMC. It got 70% of its chips from there in 2020.
And this is something that makes them concerned, frightened, but also angry.
Some in China say it must seize TSMC. But could they?
It's total nonsense. The most valuable things about TSMC is its own engineers. Those engineers could refuse to work.
Some believe TSMC isn't a target on Taiwan, but a silicon shield over it.
TSMC is going to be a deterrence against the idea of aggression against Taiwan.
That's because an attack on Taiwan would likely shut down the chip industry and ruin China's own economy. For Xi Jinping, that might be a risk worth taking.
For China, it's not just about chips. It's about unification. That is part of their basic ethos.
Coming up next, what would an invasion of Taiwan look like? Picture this: Chinese missile strikes wreaking havoc, pounding Taiwan's military. Amid the chaos, a decapitation strike. Chinese special forces try to kill or capture Taiwan's leaders. Meanwhile, a full-on amphibious assault, with hundreds of thousands of troops crossing the Taiwan Strait. This is one of the most dire scenarios experts predict for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And it may happen sooner than you think.
Beijing may be moving much faster than expected with its plans for a so-called reunification.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping has said that he seeks a peaceful reunification. But he has also said that China will never commit to abandoning the use of force to reunify with Taiwan. And that he wants his military to be ready in 3 years, according to U.S. intelligence. A single spark could set the wheels of war in motion, experts say.
Any kind of accident that could escalate out of control is a possibility.
Something as simple as an accidental collision of Chinese and Taiwanese jets.
Once we have an accident, we could see a range of the cascading actions that could eventually lead to a potential major Chinese use of force.
An initial force of 60,000 Chinese troops could try to gain a foothold on the island, paving the way for up to 1 million more troops to arrive. But Taiwan would be no easy target. Much of its terrain is rocky and unforgiving, very challenging for an amphibious assault. A key to victory for China, experts say, would be speed, securing crucial footholds on the island early, before the United States and its allies could react.
Beijing must think twice. If they are not able to take Taiwan over quickly, I think they need to pause before they act.
President Joe Biden has repeatedly said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan.
U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
Yes.
But it might take a while for the U.S. to pull the trigger on such a massive operation.
She could also try a very different approach, taking Taiwan without firing a single shot. How? By launching a massive blockade of the island.
What China would be doing is trying to choke Taiwan to make its population and its leadership capitulate.
Taiwan is almost completely dependent on coal and natural gas imports for all of its electricity. Most of its food comes from abroad. Those supplies could run low in as little as 2 weeks, according to some analysts, bringing the island to its knees. Whatever she decides, the scary fact is that Taiwan may not be fully prepared to defend itself. Many military experts have urged Taiwan to rely on the so-called porcupine strategy.
The idea there is for Taiwan to make itself so prickly, so pointy, that it would be difficult for China.
Taiwan needs to spend on a large number of small things.
Things like shoulder-fired missiles and mines. These weapons are relatively small and simple to operate, yet potentially have a very high impact.
We have to be able to inflict so much pain on our adversary and to ensure that they cannot come a step closer.
Yet Taiwan continues to order billions of dollars of bigger weapons from the US, like fighter jets and tanks, that China could destroy in a matter of hours. And over all the talk of invasion looms the specter of the most horrific threat.
We're totally in uncharted territory.
China has more than doubled its nuclear arsenal since 2020, according to the Pentagon, one of its most ambitious military initiatives. Even without nuclear escalation, this is a war that all sides would lose.
We could see millions dead.
A disaster of historic proportions.
We find ourselves looking at numbers that are akin to World War II.
Up next, my thoughts on Taiwan.
And finally, some of my own thoughts on this subject. A couple of years ago, The Economist declared on its cover that Taiwan, this tiny island home to 24 million people, was the most dangerous place on Earth. The reasons it came to that conclusion remain sound, in fact, have only grown stronger recently. The backdrop to the tensions over Taiwan is, of course, the new geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States. Ever since the rise of Xi Jinping and then Donald Trump, both nations have fundamentally shifted their attitudes toward the other, from benign to wary to hostile. Perhaps the extraordinary and rapid growth of China and the reality of America's dominant status make this inevitable. A rising power faces an established one, creating a situation that may be, in the words of Graham Allison, destined for war. But are we destined for war? The US and China are unusual in that while increasingly geopolitical rivals, they're also deeply intertwined economically. One example, during the Cold War, at the peak of US-Soviet trade, the two countries exchanged $5 billion of goods with each other in 1 year. China and the US do $5 billion in trade every few days. And that number has not dropped that much, even as tariffs, bans, and restrictions have grown in recent years. In addition, China does not seem to be a revolutionary state, seeking to overthrow the international system and present the world with an alternative ideology to America. That ideological rivalry at the heart of the Cold War is largely absent today. One thing that is present, however, is nuclear deterrence. China and the US both have large arsenals which should have the effect they have had elsewhere, from the US and Soviet Union to Pakistan and India, in deterring all-out war. And yet, there is the problem of Taiwan that sits at the heart of US-China relations. China has never accepted that Taiwan can be an independent country. Every leader, beginning with Mao Zedong, has affirmed the goal of reunifying the two. But in the past, Communist China believed that it could wait because time was on its side. Eventually, the mainland, with its massive economy and billion-plus population, would draw the tiny island of 24 million into its orbit. That was the thinking. But that premise is proving untrue. Taiwan has developed into a feisty democracy with a political culture defined by its political system and in stark contrast to China. Over the past few decades, Taiwan has gotten more determined not to reunify with China. So, Xi Jinping must look at the situation and feel time is not on his side. Perhaps it would be better to act sooner than later. For America and its many allies in Asia, Chinese aggression to retake Taiwan would be unacceptable. Washington has been willing to accept China's claims on Taiwan as long as it did not use coercion to achieve them. Taiwan policy for all sides has been about tolerating fantasies about the future as long as there are no practical changes in the present. Most people in Taiwan simply want to maintain the status quo and keep things going as they are. While the recent elections on the island brought to power for a third term a party that is closely associated with the idea of an independent Taiwan, it's worth noting that it got only 40% of the vote, with the other 60% going to two candidates with less independence-minded positions. What does all this mean? That this issue will need to be managed rather than solved, and managed very carefully, both by Beijing and Washington. This is the one place on earth where there should be little room for macho rhetoric and provocative actions. All three sides should keep talking to ensure no misperceptions or miscalculations. Deterring China from invasion is crucial, but persuading Taiwan to avoid needless provocation is also important. Washington should be careful not to needlessly provoke China as well. None of this is morally satisfying, but the stakes are high enough that one thing is clear. Were these tensions to be mismanaged, were this conflict to turn into war, it would be a lose-lose-lose for all three parties. Indeed, the whole world would suffer cataclysmic consequences. Better to kick the can down the road as long as possible and hope it doesn't explode. Thank you for watching this special hour on Taiwan. I'm Zakaria.